Good morning. How's everyone doing today? It's nice to see some familiar faces I've met over this weekend, and it's been a pleasure to talk with all of you. Let me get this up. So as Shella said, my name is Enrico Palermo. I'm head of the Australian Space Agency. Incredibly honoured to serve the nation in this role, and I'll talk about what we're doing at the agency as we go through here. But it's terrific to be back here on Arnhem land. My first visit to Gulkula was September, October last year when we had the crew out here from NASA doing their sort of preparation for the launches that I'll talk about. And I really want to extend my thanks to Denise and the team at Yothu Yindi Foundation. Incredibly generous to have an invite to represent the agency and to speak today. And of course, I would like to begin by acknowledging the custodians of this land, the Gumatj and the Yolngu people, and how generously they open this camp up to all of us over this weekend. And it's been a special weekend if I reflect on the Prime Minister's speech and how much I've learned. I came here to really listen, learn and observe. As we build a space sector, how can we do that in a uniquely Australian way? So I'm taking a lot of stories and a lot of lessons learned, and I'll talk to you that through my talk. So as many of you know, our First Nations people are essentially the world's oldest astronomers. And this is something I'm starting to develop a better understanding of through scholars and researchers. There's actually a scholar here, Dwayne Hamaka, who's Associate Professor at the University of Melbourne that wrote a book recently. And that, along with time I've been fortunate to spend on country recently in the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, it's clear there's a long and enduring scientific connection with space. This isn't just stargazing. This is reading the stars to do science, to dictate seasonal activities for tens of thousands of years. And so at the Australian Space Agency, we're proud to have a brand, and I have stickers, if people want stickers after the talk, of a brand that is inspired by First Nations constellations around Australia. So if we can play the first video, please. So it's a very unique brand for a space agency. If you look at other nations' space agency, their swishes or their swirls or their orbits. And so to have something like this in our DNA and our brand and agency is very important. But let me say, it's only a start, right? And it's a start of how we may approach developing a space sector here in Australia that takes into account the long heritage and understanding of space, and also how we do space responsibly as a nation to protect country, which includes the sky. If we bring up the first slide, our purpose at the Australian Space Agency is to transform and grow a globally respected space sector that, most importantly for me, inspires and improves the lives of all Australians. And actually this graphic, you may spot emu in the sky, which is about the space between the stars, and various countries around the nation use emu in the sky to dictate seasonal activities. And what was interesting talking to Dwayne here during the week is that's actually mirrored in some ancient cultures in South America, for example, who obviously look at the southern sky as well. If we go to the next slide, we deliver our purpose and our strategy across four pillars. International, we are the front door to the world as it pertains to civil space activities. So, manage the relationships with our partners at NASA and the European Space Agency. And until we had a space agency, we're only 4 years old, so we're a relatively new agency on the global stage. there were doors that weren't open to Australia, and so this is a role we take very seriously for the nation. National is about building national capability, sovereign capability in space technologies, advanced manufacturing. We run various programs to grow the sector and ensure we use space technologies and space data back to our purpose to improve the lives of all Australians. Responsible cuts across various things. We are the regulator for space activities here in Australia. So the recent launches by NASA, we awarded the spaceport licence and the spaceport permits to launch those rockets, and we're working on various facilities around Australia, but also pertains to what Australia does in orbit. And you know, many of you will be aware, space is getting more congested and more contested. As we embark on as a nation in space, how do we do it responsibly? How do we not exacerbate the space debris issues, for example? And then finally, inspire. Space has an incredible capacity to inspire our nation, inspire our youth to pursue careers in science and technology. It's often the spark for many to get into high-tech sectors. And we have talent all around the world, Australian talent all around the world working in this industry, and certainly part of my ambition to bring some of that talent home to help accelerate and grow our sector while we also developed the workforce here. If we go to the next slide, which I think brings our purpose back up. Our purpose is critical. It's critical to Australia's prosperity, our security, our international relations, our environment, and I'll touch on that more, and our people. As there really is so many aspects of life today that rely on space technologies or services. So I'll ask the question of the crowd, who thinks they've used space today? A few hands, yeah, more hands going up. Well, if you've communicated with your loved ones on your phone, if you've received or read or watched news or international news, or even domestic news, if you drove here today or you turned on a modern car, if you tapped your card to buy a coffee over there, if you check the weather, or if you're flying home today, you know, if you're doing any of those activities today, you're using space. So really, there isn't virtually many aspects of life today in Australia that doesn't rely on critical space services and technologies. Importantly, though, space technology and data is crucial and increasingly important to our fight against climate change. Not just a fight, how do we adapt and how do we become more resilient to natural disasters? So we're working across government with our partners in the CSIRO, the Bureau of Meteorology, Geoscience Australia, Defence and others to make sure we have that vital information increasingly to manage these critical challenges we have ahead of us. And we're doing that with our international partners. Just in April, we signed a statement of intent with NASA as part of our new national mission to collaborate on Earth observation science together as we move forward. And it was terrific to have the US Ambassador here this weekend. So if it's not our dark and quiet skies, our incredible geography and benefits there, our talent pool, our trusted relationships, there is so much that our nation has going for it as we grow our sector here in Australia. But I'm determined, one of the things that the calls to action that I've heard through the speeches in the first few days is how do we make sure these words, you know, a brand that's built upon Indigenous constellation be more than words, how do we communicate into action? And so I'm really excited by the connections I made here with the University of Melbourne and NIAA. So how we develop a sector, as I said, in a uniquely Australian way, reflecting our amazing heritage. And a great first example of how that collaboration can be beneficial to a country and also the nation is when we saw Equatorial Launch Australia and NASA team up to deliver Australia's first ever commercial space launch last month, or earlier this month. So if we just click to the next slide, I think a video will play.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh my God.
But if we can go back a slide and play it again. This was one of 3 launches. These were scientific astronomy launches, so they were launched at night time. It's a sounding rocket that threw to about 300 kilometres 300 kilometres downstream. And this was great. This has returned us to a nation that can launch things into space. Incredible milestone, and it's important I congratulate everyone involved. Firstly, the Yolngu people on the land on which this happened and their contributions. And it was very warming to hear from Mr. Jawa Yunupingu in his speech on day one about if the Yolngu can launch something into space, what else may be possible and that certainly warmed my heart. The team at Equatorial Launch Australia, they're the operator for the Arnhem Space Centre here. The Gumash Corporation, for its contribution to preparing the site, and Klaus Helms, the CEO, covered that well in a presentation on Saturday. NASA, who brought a large contingent here, over 75 scientists and researchers, and the Northern Territory government, and then our team at the agency that regulated it. It was a team effort that brought us back to this. And these are a significant, meaningful step. As I said, first time NASA had launched from a commercial facility outside the US. Yes, they're suborbital, but they still went to space, and we've now fully activated the Space Launches and Return Act, our domestic legislation to launch things. And these, as I said, were pursuit of science. They were looking at X-rays from our galaxy. They were looking at Alpha Centauri, which there's 3 stars in the Alpha Centauri constellation, closest stars to our solar system. And what they were looking at is how we may start to look at light from exoplanets that passes through the atmosphere of exoplanets. If you can start to do that, as James Webb Space Telescope just did, can we detect signs of life out there in the future? So this is real cutting edge science. You've got this juxtaposition of the world's oldest astronomers, deep connection with science, with NASA doing cutting edge X-ray and other astronomy. If we click to the next slide, 1967 Australia became one of the first nations to actually launch a satellite into space from its territory. It's called RESAT. What you may not know is here in Arnhem Land there was a tracking station by the European Launcher Development Organisation, or ELDO, which is a precursor to the European Space Agency. If you look at this map, might be hard to see from the back there, but you can see where Gove is. There was tracking stations here in those first stages. One of the things that certainly, I'll leave with today is the need for truth-telling. If you haven't read the section in the Garma booklet entitled Cultural Significance, I recommend you do, as it explains. It tells the truth that the Yolngu had no say in the development of the Eldo site in the 1960s, and the site was even abandoned and it was left for Gumash and the clan to clean up. That's not how we're going to do space going forward. Unfortunately, in contrast, and explains it in the booklet, the recent scientific launches are a better model of how we work with traditional owners and traditional custodians of the land to do space activities. And the Yolngu people, which the booklet goes on to say, were front and centre, and this was their success. And we're taking that as we look at other spaceport locations around the nation, which will be on other country around the nation. So we're an avid supporter of what was achieved in these launches, and we hope to build on the success here. Spaceport hubs are hubs for economic development. If you look at Cape Canaveral, French Guiana, various other places around the world, they also stimulate a lot in the economy. And when we had the 75 NASA professionals in town, hotels were filled, cafes were filled, and there was definitely knock-on events. It's not just here in East Arnhem Land. We are working with First Nations people. So as I mentioned before, I was invited to country with other space executives in the Wollombi region, of the Hunter region in New South Wales in early June. And we were on country for a couple of nights discussing and debating as we build this sector, and there's a lot of momentum, and I'll get on that. How do we do it responsibly? How do we do it in this uniquely Australian way, leveraging our history and knowledge of our First Nations people? And then how do we leverage space technologies and data to protect country? And that's increasingly challenging with the onset of climate change. Also in recent weeks, we've been consulting with states and territories, including in Darwin here, on the future of the Australian space sector, and there's a collective commitment from the industry and government to do more to work collaboratively on this front. And then I want to signal another great organisation that I'm going to visit next week. Does anyone know about the Centre for Appropriate Technology in Alice Springs? So this is an Indigenous-controlled, Indigenous-owned business in Alice Springs, formed about 1980. That runs very significant ground stations for various entities, where they are training and developing career opportunities for people from country in topics such as advanced geospatial analytics. And so there's definitely career development opportunities, training opportunities we can bring to country. So this is the beginning. As I said, we want to move this from words into action, and particularly around education and workforce development, we're going to have an opportunity. So to wrap up, I briefly want to touch on, if we go to the next slide, momentum in the sector. So July 1st was the first birthday of the Australian Space Agency, fourth birthday of the Australian Space Agency. I've been there all 18 months, but over those 4 years, what we've seen is an uptick in confidence and momentum that's been experienced around the nation. States and territories are investing And just by forming an agency, we really catalysed the nation around the opportunities there. We're seeing an increasing number of Australian technologies go to space, doing advanced things from trying to be the DHL of space, on-orbit logistics, to how we characterise the space environment, to looking down at Earth to collect data for climate and other purposes, into robotics and other areas. Spaceports are being developed, such as Arnhem Space Centre. We have niche technologies being invested in. We have companies working on Internet of Things from space that can, particularly for a country like Australia, there's a company called Myriota that's using satellites to connect with sensors on the ground. And one of the technologies is measuring water tank levels on big pastoral leases, which traditionally you've got to drive out to. And so we're getting a lot of efficiency and a lot of protection of country through technologies like that. We've seen a lot more private investment flow into industry as well. And for me, something I'm excited about, because I left Australia to work in the space industry, a wholesome career in space in Australia is entirely plausible today, from a graduate engineer to a researcher to an experienced professionals. And universities, about 12 universities around the nation now have comprehensive space centres or space programs. So I want to touch on two last things, which is a couple of announcements. So if we go to the next slide, we are going to the moon, and it's time we say g'day moon. So last September we reached an agreement with NASA for an Australian designed, built and operated rover to be sent to the moon as early as 2026. Its mission, actually I'll wait for the guests to come in, and I'll start on the moon mission again. All right, good morning again. We'll get restarted. Firstly, good morning to our guests. I'm honoured to quickly say a few more things before we wrap up, but you are really the stars of the show today, not me. My name is Enrico Palermo. I am head of the Australian Space Agency. So as a nation, we got our first space agency 4 years ago. So like our NASA, but little smaller scale at this point in time. We'll see how we grow in the future. But one of the things I want to go back to that the audience has seen is something really special happened here in East Arnhem Land about 4 weeks ago, and that was a series of 3 NASA launches. These were launches at night time to look at the southern sky, part of the sky we can only see from the southern hemisphere. And it was great to do this in the land of the world's oldest astronomers. So we're going to show you a video of the launch. This was the first of the 3 launches.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh my god.
We can play it again. These were 3 scientific launches by NASA. These are rockets doing X-ray astronomy of our galaxy and of planets, potentially planets around the Alpha Centauri base.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh my god.
So congratulations to everyone involved, particularly the younger people, on this success. So what I just started to talk about, which is incredibly exciting for me, I grew up in Perth and had a lifelong passion to develop a career in space, is that particularly for the youth in the room, it is entirely plausible now to have a fulsome career in space in Australia, whether it's launching rockets, developing rovers that go to the moon, developing advanced technologies and satellites. That is things you're going to be able to do in your careers. So last September, we signed an agreement with NASA, what's called a Space Act Agreement, to develop an Australian designed, built and operated rover, autonomous rover that will go to the surface of the moon. And it's got a really important mission. It's going to pick up lunar soil that we call regolith. It's like a grey, I've never seen it, but it's a grey dust. And they're going to take it to a NASA processing plant that's going to see if we can extract oxygen. So if we can extract oxygen from that regolith, Clearly that's good for humans as NASA looks to develop a permanent presence on the moon, but also oxygen is an important propellant in rockets. You need, a rocket is essentially a fire, you need a fuel, you need an oxygen source. And so having that oxygen source on the moon will allow the moon to become a leaping off space for the solar system. So this mission is going to draw on some world-leading expertise we have in Australia, so particularly in WA, but all around the nation. We operate mine sites and oil platforms and etc. autonomously from very far away, interoperability between humans and large hazardous equipment. And that's technology NASA and partners around the world have recognised that we can contribute. And so this rover is a first step in us joining the Artemis mission. And so many people grew up in the Apollo generation. The Artemis generation is going to start in a month. So at the end of August, NASA is looking to fly its first big rocket around the moon to develop it. And so pretty exciting. As part of this, we developed a campaign. We are a land of explorers and travellers for centuries, clearly. And we've put together a G'day Moon campaign, and if we roll the video, I'll talk about it afterwards.
We've long been a land of explorers and adventurers, travellers and trailblazers. We've traversed all manner of terrains, chased the horizon in every direction, climbed higher, descended deeper, gone further. And still, the quest continues. There will always be more to explore. So, where to from here? We say, bring on the beyond. Our boldest adventure yet. Australia, we're going to the moon.
So pretty exciting. I'm going to leave my talk there. Maybe later after the presentation we can take questions. I'll be around for the day. But thanks for listening, and I want to get off stage and see from this beautiful school group their presentation. Thank you, everyone.